Welcome to the Jones Zone, a podcast by Darryl and JJ Jones.
This is part 3 of Darryl's discussion with Joe about mortgages. Make sure to watch part 1 and 2 to get caught up on what a mortgage maker is and how to leverage your money using your credit. This episode explores the possibility of seeing 5% interest rates, why it's not necessary to put 20% down, and why a forced-place insurance is something you should avoid.
People ask me all the time, they've read stories, and I haven't seen it personally, but of, I forget, BlackRock or certain companies like that are buying up all this real estate. I personally haven't seen BlackRock buy any houses in my area. I'm not suggesting they haven't. This might not even be your side of the transaction, so maybe you don't have an answer for this question. Are you seeing any enormous investors like that having
haven't
impact?
really seen it, but I don't see, like, you and I work with the retail investor, we're the homeowners who our customers are. And so we're servicing the homeowner. I don't see all the back end transactions of where Wall Street or BlackRock, or which are probably the largest business in the world, or what they're purchasing and how they're acquiring, whether they're buying foreclosed properties from banks. That we don't see. I have a feeling that's where they're acquiring most of their properties. But yes, we don't see that on a day-in-day basis.
Yeah, and there's not really too many foreclosures. I mean, I remember living through that foreclosure market of 2009, 10, and 11.
Yes.
And the reason there's not foreclosures now is because, heck, people have equity. If you're late on your payment, you have a $600,000 loan, well, heck, your house is worth $1 million. You could sell it. You don't need to get foreclosed on. So people wait, and I think, nobody knows for sure, but people wait for that type of foreclosure market. Everybody says, well, not everybody, but a lot of people say, well, what goes up must come down. And they're waiting for these prices to come down. And we've been waiting. The way I look at it, looking at the data, the top of the market, or the bottom of the market, I should say, was the end of 2011. Ever since then, it's been higher, though there's been peaks and valleys. It's not a straight arrow up. It's like this, peaks and valleys. But I don't know. I don't see too many foreclosures. Do you get alerted about the foreclosure rates or anything like that?
I see the reports on them, and they're extremely low. Again, inflation and appreciation is squashed it, right? Like, same thing. And people had opportunity. Maybe they were having economic problems, small business owners, but the government you could apply for 1 and up to 2 years of forbearance, where they would say, you don't have to make that a payment. We can't even report you late. And that bank has to put that money on the back end of your loan. Those are some wonderful opportunities that we had during the worst economic time that we've seen maybe since 2008.
You talked a little bit about a person buying a car in the middle of an escrow or middle of getting a loan. What are some of the bigger mistakes that you're seeing borrowers or buyers or borrowers, same thing, make?
I mean, I don't know if it's always a mistake, but many times people are thinking they have to put 20% down. You don't have to put 20% down. You're allowed to take an 80% first trust deed, maybe take a second trust deed that has a higher interest rate. That gets a tax deduction. And now you still have cash purchasing power to do other things with, buy rental properties or not. Those are one thing. You stayed out of mortgage insurance, as we talked about, because they only count the first trust deed over 80%. If I do a first trust deed at 80% with a second trust deed, that still stays out of mortgage insurance. That's still keeping my monthly payment relatively affordable. I think that's one. I think two, people saying I'm trying to limit my closing costs to as low as possible, meaning my par rate today is 7%. And that's like, great. I don't want to pay the interest rate to buy the rate down. But hopefully your mortgage professional is educating. Let me show you what it takes if we take 2% of your loan amount and buy that interest rate down. Maybe we buy it down 3/8 or a
And I
half.
think it's fair to say that really comes into play depending on how long you're going to be in the property too. I mean, if someone
Correct.
says they're going to be there for sure for 10 years at least, if not 25, that will play a role in what decision they should make.
That is correct. And so if I said, well, I'm going to take the higher rate and I'll look at refinancing later. So hopefully you look at the opportunity. Your mortgage professional will say, let's take a look and let's compare what that looks like. Meaning, let's buy that rate down to 6.5. So maybe you even paid 2.5 points. That 2.5 points took 40 months. Now I'm going to say, well, what does it cost if I buy it down a 3/8 in rate and it cost me 2 points. And I'm looking at these opportunities. Well, it only takes me 28 months. What does that mean? The difference between that payment between 7% and maybe 6.5%. We take that figure and we divide it into the cost, what it costs to buy that rate down, which means that buyer should know that once you get to the 28-month mark, the 30-month mark, every month after that, you're in the black of saving money. So the only time you benefit by not paying points is if you know you're going to be out of that loan or out of that property in the first less than 3 years. And I'll tell you, most people are not refinancing or moving in less than 3 years. And some people are. But at that time, you might be looking into taking, well, if you know you're getting out of this property, why aren't we putting you in shorter term financing, like a 5-year arm where that's automatically going to buy your rate down at 0.5%.
ARM being an adjustable rate mortgage,
Right.
which starts at a lower rate.
Correct. So I could get one that has a fixed payment for 5 years and then turns into an adjustable rate mortgage. If you know you're going to possibly be moving, you could take opportunities of that. So hopefully your loan professional is giving you those opportunities, not just saying, here's a no-cost loan. That no-cost loan may be your benefit, but definitely you should be seeing 3 options, 4 options, and educating, because it's that person's your expert. I want to be educated on why I should take that lower rate. It's your decision, but let me give you the facts. Hey, in 36 months, every month after that, and then I'll show you in 5 years, I just saved you $4,500. And every year we go beyond that, I can show you the cost savings benefit by buying that rate down just a little bit.
Yeah, I get that a lot where I tell people it was kind of almost, well, not a trick advertising, but it was a good ad, frankly, was they would say a no cost loan and people go, oh my goodness, I want to get a no cost loan. What
Sure.
people have to realize is that, hey, they're paying it one way or another. They're paying a no cost loan, meaning they have to pay a little bit of a higher interest rate. And
Correct.
then, no upfront money. And that, of course, that has its place. I mean, for people who are trying to really leverage limited funds available, that could be a good thing. But specifically speaking is, you're saying that, hey, look, you come up with $4,000 now, after 3 years, you're going to be making money.
You're making money.
Probably too much for this podcast, but you can sit down on paper and show people the difference as far as, hey, look, this literally will cost you more if you don't buy down a point at a certain time.
Correct. We actually run a mortgage software that puts it in graph formats for, just average educated people like myself that maybe can't crunch numbers, but the graph's going to show me, hey, in 28 months, this is your break even point. And here's your cost savings after that 28th month up to the 5th year. Here's how much you're going to save. And up to the 7th year, here's how much you're going to save, in graph form, in dollar form. Very simplistic to show you. Now, because let's say I'm going to I did a no-cost loan. Well, you still paid costs. You paid an appraisal. You paid escrow. You paid title. There's still a bunch of costs.
More each month. You're paying more each month.
Yeah, but if I'm going to go, you say, well, I'll just refinance later. Well, you're going to refinance and you're going to go back and pay more. You're going to pay title. You're going to buy another appraisal. You're going to buy escrow. So your costs are going to come back again. You're going to pay some lender costs. So now there's all those costs you're going to have to recoup just for taking that no cost loan. Now, definitely, we're a first-time home buyer. I'm getting you into your dream home. We're going to create wealth because we know you're going to have income, upward mobility. We want to get you into your home so you can start creating wealth. That very easily could be the best option. I'm not saying this is a must, but you should be able to see all those opportunities, because for many people that have assets, that this might not be their best decision to do a no-cost loan.
Also, talking about interest rates and how important they are, I have a previous podcast show that I did, and we'll try to put a link in here for it, where it talks about how you can improve your credit. So listen to that podcast as well, everybody. This will be really, really helpful.
Darryl, I know you talk to buyers and potential sellers all the time, but especially those sellers. They're younger, they're moving up in their career. They bought that wonderful home at 2.5 or $1 million, but boy, they love that home around the street that's 1.75 million. And But now they're looking at the cost of that interest rate. How much resistance do they have to get out of that? Because now, instead of being a 30% higher payment being on the same rate, now maybe that payment's double. Or now I see there's people that are getting of age. They're coming at the end of their career and they want to retire. They have a 2.5–3% interest rate on this 5,000 square foot home they don't need. They want to move down to a condo. But when they go move down to the condo with a rate at 7%, they're not saving that much money as they're going into the retirement, but they really want to downsize. How much do you see that in borrowers? And is there a number that they're waiting for? Do you think triggers their repurchasing or selling
I'm
of that home?
I'm sure there is. Unfortunately, I'm not wise enough to know what that number is, but you're exactly right. We're seeing a lot of that because of the people. I mean, let's face it. I'm guessing that your refi market is almost dried up, right? Do you
Yes.
do any refis at all?
We're doing a lot of refis. I mean,
Re-
unfortunately, in this economic environment, you could easily Google the cost of how much credit card debt's out there. And there's all this credit card debt out there. And this credit card debt, once it gets to a certain level, yeah, your introductory rate was 5%, but now you're 35%. And that
Interesting.
starts to eat up very, very quickly your monthly, your monthly budget.
But
And
compared to 5 years ago, your refi is not even close.
not even close
Compared
to
to
what
when
it
they were
was
two and a
5 years
half,
ago.
yeah,
But you would be
3%.
surprised how much cash out refi is still there.
As
Whether they're
as a second or their first.
It depends. Do they have a 5.25? Again, your mortgage professional should be running the numbers as, okay, you're at 5.25 now. We can buy X amount of money at 6.75.
Well, that
Here's the
makes
cost difference. We're paying off your car. We're paying off all this credit. Maybe we're even dipping into some of the last bit of your student loan debt. But
right, but
there's a lot of credit card. Yes.
that makes sense. But yeah, the two. So back to your question about the people that are not moving because they're locked into this 2.5% interest rate, and it's all the time. I come across that all the time. People don't want to give up that 2.5% interest rate, and the irony of that is it's actually causing the market to remain strong as far as the seller goes. It's a strong
Yeah.
seller's market because there's fewer homes coming on the market. I tell you, I remember this back in 2006, 2004, 5, and 6. I remember, in fact, I met with some people and they literally couldn't even afford to buy their own house now. But what I'm getting at is I remember thinking, how's this ever going to change? Because it seems like it would never change. Because why would anybody give up a 2.5% interest rate and try and jump into a 7? But it oftentimes does. But there are a lot of people that aren't willing to move because they have the low interest rate. And the irony is it creates and continues to create more of a seller's market because there's just simply fewer homes. It's simply, we're in such a supply driven market. What I mean by that is just a lack of supply. It's not necessarily the high demand. I mean, there's obviously high demand, but it's more the fact that there's just fewer homes on the market. And that situation of people being locked into those 2.5% interest rates are causing fewer and fewer and fewer homes to be on the market that would normally be on the market. In fact, the majority of my sellers are people who are moving out of the state or are inheriting a home. I'm getting a tremendous amount of people who inherit the homes. God, unfortunately, with a death in the family, with grandpa and parents dying and passing and leaving the home to the children. But other than that, it's a very low move up market, if that makes sense.
No doubt about it. I have seen a lot of great agents that it's very, interesting. There's a few homes for sale. The home looks like it's going to go for 1.2 million. I see it go on the market for 975,000. They get 50 offers on this property and the property ends up going for $1.4 million because the feeding frenzy on the offer seems to drive up the price. It seems like a great opportunity for the sellers. But I do think on the opposite, when rates go down and we start to get more and more, and I think that's going to be the healthiest market. We get down to a 5% interest rate market. The person that wants to downsize, the person that wants to upsize, will get more inventory. We'll get a lot more buyers in the market. Everybody gets to move up, be healthy for a lot of sides. And I think that's going to be the time we're going to have a really, really healthy market altogether. We can get down to that where you could actually get out of your own loan and go buy that home you're really wanting to be into.
That would be my guess. I think 5% is probably a good number. It's interesting because it also has a good ring to it. 5%. It's funny how
Yeah.
human behavior is. They think of 5%, even though what's a big deal? 5.25, whatever. But the only challenge, though, of course, is that it's not guaranteed. We don't know. We might never see 5% interest rates for another 20 years.
We might not. I mean, there are definitely some financing opportunities in this market that I see a lot of buyers using. They're a little bit younger. They're saying no, they're upwardly mobile in their career, but they're putting themselves into where maybe they do get a little seller credit and they can use that to do a temporary buy down. Really, really powerful for both sides. The seller gets to move his property. The buyer gets to come in without that huge pain point. Maybe a 3-2-1. Most common, I would see a 2-1 buy down. What does that mean? It means my note rate today was 7%.
So what that means is you go in there, write an offer on a house. This is challenging because there's so many offers on. I've got a couple of listings right now. One was 38 offers, another with 20 offers. It's still a very challenging market, but you ask the seller to pay $10,000, let's say, or $15,000 of your closing cost. You get a lower rate by them doing that. You can also increase your purchasing power. Sometimes it's a wash. So the sellers sometimes it's like, well, okay, yeah, we can do that. Now, of course, the concern though is appraisal. So you do have to, the concern when you do that, and where some sellers may kind of frown on that would be the appraisal, the ability to have that appraisal come in. Frankly, on that topic, how have you seen appraisals coming in? Have you had many denied because the appraisal was too low? Is that common nowadays?
Not in this, I would say not at this moment. There's definitely again, those are cyclical things, right? That's where the agent and the lender, I hope they have great communication and great relationships, right? Because the information I get from you only helps me with my buyer. And the same.
So you're seeing most appraisals come.
I'm seeing most appraisals come through quite in
we
this
have
market
too.
Today.
Yeah, we have too. There are typically when you see a market that's going up high in value, it becomes a lot more challenging. In fact, frankly, that's when a lot of the cash buyers have a little bit more power. It's funny, oftentimes we'll get cash offers and they get a little cocky, to be blunt. They're a little cocky because they're cash and everything, but it's really not a big deal unless we're in such an increasing market to where the appraisal becomes a challenge. But you're right. I haven't seen an appraisal issue. I'm trying to think when the last time appraisal didn't come in. I know it's happened because of course it always happens on occasion, but it is not a frequent problem. So anyway, back to your buy down. So hopefully I was able to explain, and Joe was able to explain what a buy down is and what that means to a borrower and how it could be an option for you, especially if you're going to be in the house for a long time. And once you agree on a price, you can actually even bring it to a seller at that point if the appraisal were to come in. So you agree to a price and then think, wow, this buy down is a better option because I'm going to be in this house for a long time. Let's talk to the seller. You have to do it before the appraisal's done and possibly raise the price. You have to do that at the very beginning. But
I mean, we might be putting an offer in and working with our buying agent and saying, look, put a full price offer in, right? I put the full price offer, but ask for amount that could get us a buy down instead of paying, and that can budgetary, because right now the buyer might, we were talking about pre-qual and pre-approval. Gosh, that's a big payment. Well, if your payment right now is 3% less, wow, we're talking that now we're down under that 5% rate that I can qualify. I have that payment for 12 months. Then I have another higher one for another 12 months. And then I finally get to my note rate, and then the buyer it's not adjustable. They're locked into that rate for the eternity of that loan. They go on the 30-year, it'll be 7%. So if rates did go to 10, they're still locked into that 7%. And hopefully, especially the younger couple, it's great for because they're upwardly advancing in their careers and their incomes are going up. They should go up with that payment as well.
Joe, what advice would you give buyers in this day and age? What's some of your good advice that you give a buyer?
You get in, and as you being an agent, most of these are going for, let's say, a 30-day escrow. Lock your loan earlier in the transaction than later. And the reason why I say that, there's economic news like today. We had a massive job report, way better than expected. Mortgage-backed security sold off. Boy, interest rates shot up. And what happens for that investor that's holding that mortgage-backed security, it's a big risk for him. So they're going to raise the rate even higher because they don't know how far that bad news is going to go, or bad news, at least for the mortgage-backed security. Good news in the economic market. But then once the market settles and we start, it's going to take much more time to get down. They go up probably 3 or 4 times faster than even when you get the bad economic news. It takes time for that because nobody wants to get caught offside that's holding that security and lose money. In 30 days, many times I say, oh, let's float. I think it's going to be better tomorrow.
Floating means you're not locking your rate. In other words, buyers, you could be quoted a 7% rate and you don't lock it in, which means you're floating it. You're gambling that, hey, the rate's going to go even lower. Joe's suggesting that really strongly consider locking that rate because it goes up a lot faster than it goes down. And you're more likely better off locking the rate in. So in case it does go up. So those people that locked their rate in, it probably have people locked it in at 6.75 maybe, and now it's 7.5 or 7.25 or something like that. And but they're locked in, so they don't have to worry about it.
They don't have to worry about it. And here, and not every loan product with every investor, but many of your products will offer you what's called a float down option, meaning that investor took that lock on. And I know it's 7% and rates went down to 6.75. We're using just some basic numbers. They're probably not getting that rate lock at 7%, or the risk is they're going to go somewhere else. So they'll go back. A lot of the lenders, we can approach that investor that we locked in good faith and say, hey, any way we pay some, you pay some, and we could give the borrower a little bit more benefit to stay with us. And in many times, they're going to get some, they're not going to come all the way down to the current market because it's not fair, because it's a loss. It's a loss for us as the lender. It's a loss for the person that's going to be at the back end of this loan that buys it. But the borrower's still going to get some benefit. Everybody gets to secure their agreement. Yes, we locked it with you. Yes, we delivered it to you. Yes, we just didn't make as much money, or we waived it, but we didn't lose money and we kept our borrower. So there's float down options that you can have. So, but the one thing is, once you lock, they never say, hey, there's float up options. We're going to now jack your rate up. And the nice thing about the investors and the banks, they're going to honor your rate and they're going to give your lock all the way through the lock period time.
Speaking of money, other than you've got a down payment, tell the listeners what other costs are typical for a borrower. You got your down payment, let's say 20%. Then there's the appraisal, there's running the credit report, there's lender fees.
Yep, the lender's going to have a fee. There's escrow, there's title. And then there's also the extended where the borrower wants to buy a buyer's policy, a title, right? They're going to buy, there's a lender's policy that they have to buy to get a loan to protect the lender, and the lender's going to get insured for their protections of liens. But the buyer's also going to buy a buyer's policy, and I would hope that they all entertain that because that's going to protect them against in the future. So they could potentially file claims on lot lines, and you are much more experienced than I could, and you probably encourage your borrower to do that. Also, they're going to do a home inspection. That's a great one for the borrower, to where they're going to pay a third party that's an expert in going into inspecting the home to really find out how's the foundation, how is the electrical updated. And so all those things are of great value, but they are of cost, especially on a purchase loan that you're going to obtain.
Yeah. And typically the only out-of-pocket cost, if, for example, you do find something wrong with a house, would be your inspection and oftentimes your appraisal fees. Typically, we'll tell buyers, do the inspection first, make sure it's all adequate, boom, then you order the appraisal. And that's typical cost of escrow and everything. Is it 1% or less than 1% for all? I know it depends on the points and what type of loan you're getting. Is that fair to say?
It would be fair to say. And then you're also going to have your costs for insurance, your property insurance. And then, in California, We've had some situations where there's been a State Farm, and not to try to pick on them, but they've left the state.
I don't think that's not their fault. The math doesn't play out. It's the darn regulations. But anyway, that's a whole different topic.
But there's also a lot of costs that have gone up to go and buying as well. But those are your hard costs that we covered, correct?
Yeah, insurance. In fact, it's funny. We used to give the insurance. We used to escrow officer would wait till near the close of the escrow and say, hey, by the way, who's your insurance? And no problem. Boom, would put it in there. Now we're telling buyers right when we open escrow, start shopping for insurance. And that's another devastating thing about these fires is that the insurance is just going to be even more challenging to get 6 months from now or a year from now. I don't know how that effect's going to have.
I just closed a home up in the wooded areas up in a mountain, and I didn't realize a lot of them are implying these extra California insurance that you have to carry for these hazard areas, not just your typical fire and hazard you would normally have maybe in a metropolitan area. So it can be even a lot more expensive up in some of the rural areas.
Have you had anything fall out? I haven't had anything fall out of escrow because they couldn't get insurance. I've had high premiums people have had to pay and kind of just plug their nose and pay it. But have you had anything fall out because it couldn't get insurance?
I didn't have it fall out, but I almost lost because we got some insurance bids up, and then we found out when they actually went to get the insurance, it was about $250, $300 more a month. And so that came in higher. The market just happened to go up in rate. And so the affordability factor of our pre-approval that we were pre-approved at, and that insurance cost was affecting our affordability and our approvability.
20 years ago, would you even look at insurance costs as far as figuring out the ratios? Has always been part of the formula?
You'd always put in a part of the formula, but
now it's much bigger.
To talk about, I hope my brother's not listening, but I know my brother lives up in the middle of the mountains in a big fire area, and it's exorbitant. It's in the several $1,000s a month. And we were doing a refinance on his home. And he was so afraid because we were going to just have to change, the lender on the policy. He goes, I can't lose my insurance. If I don't have this insurance, there's no more insurance to get on my property. And it was his biggest fear that he would get canceled even though he was just refinancing his home and we were just changing the, beneficiary on it.
That leads me to something that I was talking to my wife about. She was talking about how this may be something you don't know because maybe this is something that the investor, the company that buys your loans from you. But whenever a borrower borrows money, just so the audience knows, they have to get homeowners insurance. That secures in case there's a fire. Well, if the borrower doesn't, let's say they lapse 2 years later and it lapses and they don't get insurance. My wife was even saying, no, I had heard this, that the lender will provide insurance, but it's got to be, and maybe you don't know much about this or not, but it's got to be 3 times as much, right?
I do. I started my career as an underwriter. I started my career in the servicing end. So I have a wide background of knowledge in this business. And so, so obviously they have a lien on that property. The borrower still owns it, but they have a huge interest. And if they have no insurance and it burns down, they don't have an asset to take back.
Right.
They have an insurance department that are following to make sure. And when it gets close, if you don't have it insured, they're going to do what's called forced place insurance. It's going to be the most aggressive, most expensive. Make sure they have their protection against the asset that they lend against. So yes, that property is always, they're not going to get away with. So you, as a borrower, you want to keep on top of the affordability of your insurance and keep it up so it is always insured.
So all of a sudden,
lapse.
Your mortgage payment goes up a lot of money. You're thinking, what the heck's going on? It's because they're now paying for the insurance, which
you're paying for the highest bid that they got because they want to protect themselves. They're not, they already bought the loan and they want to make sure that they have interest to get. Yeah. And if they have to foreclose somehow, if it's ashes, they're not going to get anything.
Well, it's funny. I just closed escrow on a property. It's interesting because the buyer oftentimes now is asking, hey, who's the seller's insurer? So maybe we can check with them. And my guy he owned it free and clear. He owned it free and clear. He didn't have insurance on the property, which is perfectly legal. It's not illegal. The only reason one has to have homeowners insurance is because there's a loan against the property. It's not a law that you have to have homeowners insurance. But of course, if you own it free and clear, there's risk if you're fired, you don't get anything.
This is a great point. I had a lunch with another gentleman. He was in the mortgage insurance business, and we do business together, but we're having lunch just talking. And this gentleman owned his home free and clear in Florida. And as we know, there's constant hurricanes coming through there. Well, like California and our fires, exorbitant amount of costs. He goes, the cost of the insurance is so great, it's less of a risk for me to replace the damages. And if the damages are so great, hopefully I'm getting federal funding. So he literally rides because he owns his home free and clear with no insurance because insurance costs in some of these areas like California and Florida are so high.
Interesting.
So definitely a real thing.
Okay. Hey, Joe, thank you so much for joining us here for this episode of the Jones Zone. This was some very, very valuable information. And Joe, if any of our listeners want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to contact you? Email, cell phone? Tell us.
Email would be great. Cornerstone First Mortgage, as I just told you, as the vice president here, it's J JOMAHEN at CFMTG.com.
Say that one more time for our listeners.
That is JO, M as in Mary, AHEN at CFMTG.com.
So anybody you have questions for Joe, contact Joe. For me, you can call me, comment, and I'll get a hold of you. Again, Joe, thank you. That was just awesome information. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I learned a lot from you as well. Thanks so much, Darryl.
Well, thank you. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.